we won't have a whole ton of time in class to talk about the causes of World War I, and since this is a U.S. history class, we really have to focus on why the U.S. joined the war. But it's a world war, so what happens in other countries is obviously going to be important for a world war, especially since the U.S. doesn't join World War I until 3 years in. So this is just, the purpose of these notes is to help you understand the long-term causes of World War I that led to its outbreak in 1914, so that you can have the background information you need to understand what this war was all about. So it's a 4-year war, and be aware that at the time it was not called World War I. It would not be called World War I until World War II begins. So from 1914 to 1918, it's called the Great War. It's called the War to End All Wars. No one ever expected another World War to occur. There's 32 nations involved in this war, so it truly was a world war. But it does start in Europe, and most of the battles occur there. And in this picture here, you can see the trenches in France, and many of the battles are taking place in northern France. So here you've got the long-term causes of World War I. And these are really important ideas for you to know just in general as a student of history. You can see 3 of these are isms, and an ism, an ISM word, will always be a belief. So don't make these harder than they are. These were ideas that had been driving the countries of Europe for quite a long time. So militarism is easy. Like, militarism is just the policy of building up strong armed forces. And you can build strong armed forces by improving your weaponry and making them more advanced. That would be a militaristic policy. Or you can increase the size of your military with larger numbers of troops and more weapons. But when countries do this, like, they're not just building up militaries to have them sit and do nothing. They're building up militaries to use them to prepare for war. So all of the countries of Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries are practicing militarism. There's this continual buildup of armies and navies throughout European countries. Germany tripled the construction of its navy to try to challenge Britain's control of the seas. And Germany also was known for having a strong army. Britain's was the strongest navy. So all of these countries in Europe were practicing militarism. Alliances is the next one. So these alliances are defensive pacts. They're not offensive. These are agreements that countries made to defend and help one another when their friend, their ally, was under attack. So if their friend decided to go and attack somebody else, a country would not be obligated to go and help them out. If we are allies with Canada and Canada decides to go on a rampage around the world attacking other places, we have no obligation to go and help them. They can go and do what they want, but we don't have to help out. Because alliances are defensive pacts. They're about protecting your friend when they have been attacked. And there were 2 alliance systems that were created in the years leading up until World War I. There was the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, and they had more casual names too that you'll see on the next slide. Imperialism is the third one. Imperialism is the belief that a country should take control of the economic or political affairs of another country or region. When you think of imperialism, you should think of creating colonies. And you know about this because we were colonies. So we were part of that British Empire that had been around for centuries and that was still around at this point. And the other nations in Europe had been creating empires too. So imperialistic countries are creating empires. And this idea of imperialism, we've already talked about, or we will talk about this week, how America wants in on the game too. All of these European countries were creating colonies and had been for quite some time. And then once the world has once there's no more places to conquer, once there are no more new places to conquer, then the only thing left to do to get a new colony is to take it from somebody else. So that can lead to conflicts between these European empires that have been created. And then your last long-term cause of World War I is nationalism. And this is the belief that your country is better than everybody else. You really need to be careful because this isn't patriotism. Patriotism is love for your country. And you can love your country and not think that it's superior to every other country in the world. That's nationalism. Nationalism is when you love your country so much that you think you're superior to everybody else. And you do always what's in the best interest of your nation. This leads to mistrust of other countries. It leads to hatred toward other countries. And all of the European countries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were nationalist. And that means you get competition between countries because if you think your country is better than everybody else, you need to prove it. I hope you've noticed in this list of long-term causes the acronym MAIN. So use that as a tool to help you remember these long-term causes. Keep it simple for yourself. You don't need to know tons of details about European history for this, but you do need to know these basic concepts about how World War I started. The alliances that I mentioned on the last screen were the Central Powers, which officially was called the Triple Alliance. And I know that's annoying because you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, you've got the Allies, which is the other alliance system here, and their official name was the Triple Entente. Focus on the casual names of Central Powers and Allied Powers. I think that that's more helpful for you, and you'll hear those referenced more often. And they are their official names each start with triple because they start out with as a group of 3 countries. But if 32 nations are involved in this war, obviously there's going to be more than that on each side ultimately. But the key countries in this are Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire. Now this is on the Central Powers at the beginning of the war. You need to make note for Italy that Italy will switch sides. Italy is going to switch sides. I don't know why that disappeared. So Italy switches sides because they are promised by the Allied powers that they'll be given land that's on the border of Italy and Austria-Hungary once the Allied powers win. So Italy switches sides and becomes a member of the Allied powers a little bit into the war. Your key allies, there were many Allied powers, but your key allies are Great Britain, France, Russia. But Russia is only in the war from 1914 until 1917. They will drop out of the war because of the Russian Revolution. They have to withdraw to deal with their communist revolution and the civil war that breaks out. And that's really essential because a month after Russia drops out, we join the war. And we join the Allied powers. And they need us because Russia has dropped out. Strategically, we were an important ingredient for the Allies to win in 1917. They needed us. We were officially neutral until 1917, though. In 1914, when the war breaks out, a majority of Americans want to stay out of this war. And so we succeed at doing that for 3 years. When war breaks out, we generally are in favor of the Allies, though. Like, we don't want to fight. But in regards to trade, overseas trade, and in public opinion in general, Americans generally favored the Allied powers for the 3 years of war leading up to our entry. But we were not a member of that alliance. We do not join the Allied powers until 1917. So here you've got just a map of Europe to help you see these two alliance systems. You've got in green the Allied powers. In reddish-orange you've got the Central powers, and then the yellow are the neutral powers. The Central powers, it's easy to remember and understand why they're the Central powers because look, they're right down the center of Europe. Strategically, that's a problem because they will face a two-front war, and Germany wanted to avoid that. You can see the arrow from Germany into France, the red arrow. Initially, they marched through Belgium and into France, hoped that they could overwhelm France, conquer France quickly, and then send all of their troops over to fight against Russia. But that did not work. They were unsuccessful. So Germany and Austria-Hungary faced a two-front war. You've got Russia pressing in from the east, you have France and Great Britain pressing in from the west, and here you can see Italy on this map has already switched to being one of the Allied powers. You have Bulgaria here also as a central power. They were a more minor one, but you can see them on this map. Also be aware that this peninsula with Greece, Montenegro, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Sarajevo. This is called the Balkan Peninsula, B-A-L-K-A-N, the Balkan Peninsula. It's known as the powder keg of Europe, and that's because there are so many different population groups living there that borders have shifted all the time through armed conflicts between these groups, and armed conflicts continue today on the Balkan Peninsula. This is where the war breaks out. You can see that the event that's the trigger event for the war there on June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a Serb nationalist. The assassination happened in Sarajevo, which was in Bosnia. Bosnia was part of Austria-Hungary. Serbia had been part of Austria-Hungary, but they had recently gained their independence from Austria-Hungary. And the problem was that there were people of Serbian ancestry still living in this area of Bosnia where Sarajevo was located. And the Serb people felt, many of them felt, that that section of Austria-Hungary should have been part of Serbia. So a Serb nationalist traveled to Sarajevo. A group of Serb nationalists actually traveled to Sarajevo when Franz Ferdinand was visiting and assassinated him. And this is what triggers the war, because Austria-Hungary blames the Serbs for the assassination, so they declare war on Serbia. But Serbia has a secret alliance with Russia, so Russia must come to Serbia's defense. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Well, Germany is an ally of Austria-Hungary, so Germany now has to declare war on Russia and Serbia. And so it's this domino effect of countries who have made alliances who now have to come to their allies' defense. And that whole domino effect is set off by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist. And then that's when Germany will attack France unsuccessfully. You can, in the North Sea, you can see up by Denmark, the British are going to set up a blockade there to starve out Germany, and they're pretty successful at that. Germany isn't able to do a whole lot of shipping, and so they will have a famine during World War I. And another thing that happens to Germany is that's actually good is when Russia, you can see when Russia drops out of the war, remember Russia will drop out in 1917, then Germany is able to take any of those troops that had been fighting against Russia on the Eastern Front and send them over to France, which is really important because right around that time, that's when America will come across the Atlantic Ocean, arrive in France, and our troops are going to be fighting in France. We will be fighting on the Western Front. None of our troops will ever fight on the Eastern Front because by the time we enter the war, there is no Eastern Front because Russia has dropped out. So use this map to help you understand the war a little bit and the alliances involved. You don't need to know all of the details of the outbreak of the war, but you should be able to have a general idea of why this war started. And again, here you have the list of the countries and the alliances. You might want to add Bulgaria to the Central Powers. I'm not sure why I don't have it up here. And you might want to draw an arrow from Italy over to the Allies to remind yourself that they do switch sides. If you've got any questions, make sure you talk to me about them.